All right, so hi everyone. Sorry for the delay in getting this lecture to you. But today we're going to continue talking about cultural psychology, learning why humans are unique in their experience of having culture. So let me just toggle hide floating meaning controls. There you go. All right, so we talked about the different kinds of learning, and we watched the short video of the puzzle box. But just to go over which type of learning is better again. So there's two types of learning. There's imitative learning and emulative learning. So emulative learning is something that chimpanzees can engage in. And it's something that's more efficient in the short term. You can figure out the ways of using a tool, just like the chimpanzees did, but it doesn't allow for cumulative learning. Whereas imitative learning, on the other hand, it's not just imitating the model, but it's also using theory of mind or mentalizing to be able to determine what the model's intentions and goals were. So although this is less efficient in the short term, um, it does lead to cumulative learning. So it allows for faithful and high fidelity reproduction. And another maybe weakness is it requires models to exist. But that's why we have teachers, right? We have our parents, we have community members that teach us all about our culture. All right, and this is the video that we watched when we ended class last. So another important component and difference distinction between humans and apes and other animals is that we have a language. We have symbols that mean something, and many of us can understand what the meaning is, just like when I hit my fists together, like Ross does in Friends. All right, so why is language important for cultural learning? So when you're talking and using language, you can communicate ideas, even if you don't have physical items present. If so, this happens with my husband all the time. If my husband knows where a tool is, he can sort of walk me through where a tool is if he's not home, and I can find it, right? So he has the mental capacity to have a working memory of the locations of all items in our home and what our home looks like. And even though he's not physically there, he can direct me. So with language, we can communicate ideas, even really complicated ones, without needing a visual demonstration. Super important. Apes need that visual demonstration. You can't tell an ape like, hey, there's this clear box where you have to put a stick in and you might get a candy. They're gonna be like, what the hell are you talking about, right? Whereas I could tell my son like, hey, later we're gonna go to the park, and he has an idea of what a park is. He knows that a park is fun and something that he wants to do. So communication is important. So language is also unique to humans based on all the different rules we have for grammar and syntax, as well as the different kinds of vocabulary that we use. And we're going to talk about different vocabulary that exists within each subculture. And it's necessary for the successful and precise transmission of cultural ideas. So in this way, we're able to tell others. So if you think about American culture versus Canadian culture versus Mexican culture or college student culture, you're able to communicate the things that make up that culture. Another component of culture that makes the use of culture distinct between humans and other species is that we're really motivated socially. We're motivated to share experiences and goals. So this is essential to cultural learning. So a lot of our learning occurs in a collaborative way. What do I mean by collaborative? Since we're born, we're exposed to many, many people. We're exposed to many ideas. We watch TV. We learn about the culture through the books that our parents read us, through the cartoons that we watch, through the students that we engage in, through whoever cares for our children. Cultural transmission happens from birth, and it's very socially based. So sharing these experiences allows for collaborative learning, so figuring things out together, and it also leads to instructive learning. So this occurs when the model is able to direct the actions of learners to guide them towards a desired behavior. So for instance, this happens in college in a more complex way, right? So some professors teach statistics, so they're able to teach you how to conduct statistical analyses, for instance, in order to get the desired behavior, your competency in statistics. And how does this occur? So we don't go from birth to reading to running, right? So there have to be intermediate steps, and these intermediate steps happen through scaffolding. So you simplify a task by directing a learner's attention to the relevant steps in the process. So all of us have done laundry. But if I were to tell Diego, yeah, we just wash clothes and then we dry them and then we hang them up and that's it. No, the first time you did laundry, you probably had either had your parents or a friend show you, or you read the laundry box and you said, okay, first you have to separate the colors and the whites, and then you have to make sure your load isn't too big, and then you put the laundry in the machine. And depending on what kind of machine it is, I have a front loader, not a top loader. So then I have to put a very minimal amount of soap because it's a high efficiency laundry machine. And then we wash it, we set it, we wash it. It sings a tune when it's done. Then we throw it in the dryer. We set the time for the dryer. We take out clothes that might be too sensitive for the dryer and we hang it up in a place to dry, and so on and so forth. Also, when you learn statistics, you don't learn statistics first, right? You first have to learn like my son knows numbers now. Then he has to learn addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. Then we get into algebra, and then we get into geometry, and then we get into trigonometry, and then we get into calculus, and then we can scaffold from there to statistics. So this instructed learning allows cultural information to be reproduced accurately because it shows learners that there's a set norm they should follow, and they're given guidance on how to follow the norm correctly themselves. In other countries, like my mom growing up, she had to wash clothes by hand with rocks. So laundry for her and her cultural norm was, okay, once a week, the women get all of the family's laundry together and you carry it down to the river. And once you're down to the river, you have soap and you have water and you have rocks and you clean them. I actually don't know what the details are, but I'm just guessing that this is the cultural norm of doing laundry. So our current existence is a result of cumulative cultural evolution. So that means that the culture that exists now is sort of a scaffolded representation of all the cultures that have existed in the past that we've interacted with. So the major difference between human and other animal cultures is that human cultural learning is cumulative. We talked about how animals cannot have cumulative transmission. So this requires reliable and faithful social transmission. That means that we have to have educators, we have to have elders who transmit these cultural norms. And it also requires it requires imitative learning, which we talked about, right? It's about mentalizing, knowing what other people's goals are, and sophisticated language, being able to communicate the cultural norms, being able to demonstrate them, being able to talk about complex ideas. And human culture is characterized by the ratchet effect. So a ratchet is a tool, and hopefully you've used it. And cultural information, the ratchet effect is when cultural information tends to grow in complexity and usefulness because people learn from others and add their own modifications. And as more modifications are made and they accumulate over time, you can think of it as getting another notch on the ratchet. So culture keeps growing, keeps evolving. So individual learning through emulative learning doesn't allow for the ratchet effect across generations. What matters is imitative learning and cumulative learning. So this is an example of cumulative culture. So the modern day hammer is a product of generations upon generations of ideas, inventions, and injuries that were adapted and modified over time. So this was some of the first anthropologically known hammers. And it has ratcheted from stones for stones, and maybe you have like some grip on the stones to help you not hurt your fingers. You have ones, yeah. Then you continue going, and then we finally have someone who tied some kind of stick to a rock to make sure that you don't have to use your whole fist, but maybe you can grab it in your hand. And then we have different modifications, and it keeps growing. And with each new generation, we continue changing all of the different kinds of hammers. And number 14 isn't a hammer you've probably seen, but this is a gigantic steam hammer from 1842. So think about the Industrial Revolution. That's one way that we can visually and also conceptually understand cumulative culture. So we're always improving upon prior culture's existence and inventions. What about population size and interconnection? So this is really wild. The extent to which cultural transmission happens now is so incredibly fast. You can think of one form of cultural transmission to be fads or knowing who's popular in the media or who's a pop star and who isn't, and so on and so forth. So it used to be that we had these little tribes, right? And maybe we interacted with a few other tribes throughout our lifetime. But now with the advent of social media, with internet access, with access to all sorts of news sources, we can see what's happening in other cultures in real time. All right, so another reason why cultural accumulation is accelerating for a rapid pace is one, because of the growing population. We have over 8 billion people in the world, and interconnection, and that is where the social media and the advent of news and being on the internet and getting all this information comes into play. So, okay, so there was one experiment testing the relationship between population size and cultural evolution. So participants were asked to reproduce and improve a fishing net in a computer game across 15 trials. So in the game, they were shown a fishing net, and then they had to recreate that fishing net across 15 trials. And what they manipulated was whether people were in groups of 2 or 16. So the independent variable was the group size small or was the group size big? And they wanted to see whether group size had an effect on cultural evolution, on how well people could reproduce this fishing net. Another factor in the study was that participants could choose to view other people's nets after each trial. So after one trial, they're like, dude, I didn't get it. It doesn't look anything like the net. You can look at someone else's net. And you can choose the net that someone else made that was ranked the highest. After each trial, each net maker would be ranked. And you could see either the best model or the worst model. But if you want to get as close as possible to recreating that net, obviously you're going to choose the best scoring net. All right, there were 15 trials. Participants earned points on how well they did in each trial. They worked in groups of either 2 or 16. In the large groups, participants would usually choose to look at the net of the person who got the highest number of points. That is, they usually chose to see the best model and tried to copy it. So who was better at reproducing the net? Almost all people in the 16-person group could reproduce the net versus half of those in the 2-person group. So here we go. So this is the probability of accurately reproducing the net after 15 trials, and this is the group size. So as you see, when you have a group of about 16, you're between 90 and 100% likely to get the net. However, if you're in a group of 2, you're like at 49%, so about half of the probability of recreating the net as the relative to when you're in a group of 16. Sorry, I was actually on my screen. So let me actually use this so that you can see what I'm talking about. 2 versus 16. Some people in the 16-person group produced nets with improvements on the original, but none of those in the 2-person groups did. So what this is telling us and showing us is that larger groups have better cultural information that can be maintained and improved upon. So bigger cultural groups are better for cultural improvements and like the ratchet effect over time. All right. We live in cultural worlds. Cultural ideas are part of this cumulative culture. So for instance, similar cultural ideas are democracy, mathematical reasoning, and cultural worlds contain cultural ideas that are accumulated over time. These are unique to humans, and some examples, like we talked about earlier, are schooling, markets, governments, the internet. Like, why are things the way that they are here in the US versus in other cultures? It's because we've seen it to be effective for us. All right. Slide 41. Right. So let's talk about the human brain. So the human brain has a large encephalization quotient. So the encephalization quotient is the brain weight of the animal divided by the predicted weight compared to animals of the same size. So our encephalization quotient is 4.6. So that means that our brains are 4.6 times larger than would be expected given our size relative to other animals, you know. So this allows for the cognitive resources for complex mental capacities that are necessary for cultural learning, but at a cost. So our brain, we talked about in the first slide, how we are related to apes evolutionarily, but apes have much smaller brains and we have much smaller muscles. So we don't have as large of a muscle mass as chimps do. So one of the differences is we have bigger brains, we have smaller muscles, but there is a cost of the human brain. So having such a large brain has a huge energetic cost. So it consumes 16% of all basal metabolism, yet the brain only accounts for 2% of its body weight. So if our brain consumed as many calories as its percentage body weight, then it would only consume 2% of our daily calories. So if you're consuming about 2,000 calories a day, about 320 of those calories are exclusively for your brain. It's also interesting that even when you're not thinking about something difficult or even daydreaming, your brain is still working hard. When you're sleeping, your brain is still working hard. There is no point when your brain isn't working. So your brain requires almost as much energy when it's focused on a task as when your mind is wandering. And what's even more wild about this is that in many other animals, brains only use about 1 to 3% of their basal metabolism. What about humans versus chimpanzees? So the human EQ is almost twice that of chimpanzees. But human bodies needed to change to accommodate the increased energetic demands of larger brains. So over the course of between 5 and 7 million years, our bodies had to evolve in ways to accommodate our larger brains. So what did we give up? We had to give up to create our muscle mass, and we had to have a smaller digestive tract. So cooking is one of the reasons why we have a smaller digestive tract, because other species have to eat a lot of their food raw. So for instance, they eat other animals raw and so on and so forth. But the fact that we have cooking that sort of pre-digests our meals for us, or we process our foods in ways that makes it easier for us to digest. So like for people who eat tortillas, we use nixtamal to process the corn so that way we can make tortillas, and that it's much easier for our bodies to process tortillas than it is to process corn. So we can extract more nutrients through cooking also, and spend less time eating and digesting if we cook our food. So cooking is also an example of something called a gene culture evolution. So let's talk about a gene culture evolution, coevolution. So this is how genetically evolved skills can lead to cultural changes, which continue over time and shape the culture or shape the evolution of genes. So cooking is a good example of this because cooking contributed to the evolution of our genes over time. All right, we should have done this in class, but that's okay. We don't have to do it right now. But essentially what we were supposed to get from these questions is that our brain is a very expensive organ to maintain, but we need to maintain it in order to maintain our social ties and our cultural strengths. And ultimately survival. All right, so what about the social brain hypothesis? So the fact that we are social creatures led to the evolution of primate brains, which became bigger. So our brains are primed to socialize and to learn through culture. Culture helps us survive. So in primate social worlds, there's a lot of complexity. So there's some hierarchy involving conflict, cooperation, nepotism, and reciprocity. And this leads to you needing to successfully navigate complex relationships. So more socially adept primates attract more mates, they accrue better resources, and they protect their offspring better. So even in primates, having good social skills is important for your survival. So what about for humans? So the neocortex is relevant for higher brain function, including sensory perception and other things. The neocortex ratio measures the size of the neocortex relative to the rest of the brain. So the volume of the neocortex divided by the volume of the brain. This is one proxy measure of intelligence. And in primate brains, the neocortex is much larger than in other mammals' brains. And primates with larger brains engage in more social learning. So this is showing the relationship between an average group size and the neocortex ratio of various species or primates. So we just talked about how the neocortex ratio is probably higher for primates who have to engage, or animals who have to engage in navigating these social worlds, like primates do. Thus, the group size of primates, the higher the group size, the larger the neocortex ratio should be. The larger the neocortex ratio predicts a larger group size. So hopefully you read the textbook. So based on this neocortex ratio, human ancestral population should have been about 150. That seems to be like the cap at which we can know people's names, we can know other family members, that we can interact with them, that we can keep track of who's who and where's the hierarchy and who likes who and who I should aim to please, who can get me a better position of power. So the research suggests that humans can have a cognitive capacity to keep track of 150 relationships. And in fact, in 1993, a researcher by the name of Dunbar found that present-day subsistence societies the average size of a clan was about 148 people, which is indeed about 150. Let's see. Humans are ultra social. We've been talking about that. So compared to other primates, we live in larger social groups. We appear interested in other people's activities. We want to know what other people are up to. Again, gossip, kind of like gossip culture. And we engage in more cultural learning in that way. So because of our ultra social needs, our human brains might have developed better learning and communication abilities than those in other ape species. So humans are distinctive in that they engage in so much social learning. We have mentalizing. So just the theory of mind, I think, is so fascinating. The fact that we have to know or be able to guess other people's intentions was so important for us historically. We needed to guess who was a friend, who was a foe, who was likely to help us, who was likely to hurt us, just for our survival. But even then, that happens now in more petty ways, like through gossip. But it's just interesting how our brains have evolved in order to um, address our super social worlds. And it begs the question, what is happening now that our social worlds have become even more all-consuming? So in the past, you were able to go to your tribe and just hang out in your whatever shelter you made for yourself and not have to think about other groups. Like you could imagine other people, or you could imagine what scenarios would be, but now you know what everyone's up to, what everyone's eating, who everyone's dating on an immediate basis. So I wonder how brains are currently going through evolution to address this overwhelming sense of social information. And finally, being able to learn skills from observing others is a key reason behind the evolution of our big brains. We tend to look for mentors that are doing well. All right. Culture is not unique to humans based on the second definition we talked about, but cumulative cultural learning is. Cumulative cultural learning is facilitated and allowed for by theory of mind, language, and imitative learning. The evolution of the human brain occurred in connection with social pressures, and we are really good compared to other primates in realms such as social learning and cultural transmission. Woo! All right, we finished today's chapter. Great. Let me get out of here. So I'm at home right now, but you should find me. So make sure to read the article that I posted. It's on cultural evolution. We'll be talking about it on Monday. I'm also going to try to make these lectures shorter so that you don't have as many lectures, maybe just one live lecture and then one day for reading is my goal so that you don't have a ton of work. All right, great week this week. I have entered the grades for the practice quiz and I'll see you on Tuesday. Bye.